little faster, Max.
Well, good morning, Glue Troopers. Max and Max's Models here. And apparently the other day was Godzilla Day. I've gotten a couple of emails from folks that, although from what I dug up, October 27th, 1954 is when the original Godzilla movie premiered in Nagoya. A lot of places say that November 3rd, 1954 is actually considered the real open date. I guess that's when it went nationwide. Nagoya might have been a pre-screening, and I think it was because I seem to remember reading somewhere when they first showed the movie. Some people panicked, although I understand that when they showed it in Tokyo, that when I guess it was the Imperial Theater or something, he tears down at one point. Somebody in the theater got up and ran out. Of course, you never know if those are apocryphal stories or if they really happened. But anyway, the impact of the big lizard cannot be overestimated. And wow, next year will be 24. So wow, next year will be the 70th anniversary. Can you believe that? Anyway, I'm sure we all remember the first time we saw a Godzilla movie, and with me it was the original with my dad, and an 8-year-old or 6-year-old, wherever it was, it terrified the living snot out of me, and that's why I love it to this day. You couldn't get me to see a Godzilla movie after that until I was about 12, 13 years old. But anyway, we all have that movie that hit us that way. I know with some folks it was The Fly. I know a couple of people who it was The Fly. And I know a couple of people who it was various alien movies, War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds had that impact on me, but I would watch every time it came on. And, they're both Cold War metaphors, which explains why they're so effective. But I'm also kind of a little surprised that some of these movies don't have more models made of them. Although there is a lot more now than there used to be. As much as we lament the loss of the heyday of model building, it's halcyon days in the mid-60s, the simple fact is we have more options today and better kits. And the Polar Lights large-scale Godzilla, which I have one on the shelf and another one I'm still planning to build. It's just one of those projects I hadn't got around to, but it's one of those things that it's part of the culture now. And the quality of the kit, the new kit, is really, really probably one of the best research, if not the best research monster kit ever made. And that's cool. And now, of course, we've got, like I say, a lot of options that we didn't have before. The scaling becomes an issue, but of course, the new Polar Lights one's 1:144, so there's a lot of 1:144 stuff. But there's which is ironic because the tank they put in there with it, which is actually from a later Godzilla movie. I think it's a Type 61. In the original movie, they were using Chaffees, but anyway, yeah, that's not the end of the world. So, but the tank, I took a measurement on it. I think it's like a 1:100 or something. It's a little too big. I actually have some 1:144 vehicles that I'm going to use for a diorama when I get around to making the other one. But anywho, happy guy. A couple of Glue Troopers sent this to me, Tony and Lance. Guys, I want to thank you. So, I've also put a link below of somebody that's running some sort of a Godzilla marathon in honor of that. So anyway, just thought that was a little interesting tidbit for the morning. Now, yesterday I shot a bunch of little random vignettes, and I'm going to be putting together some videos so that they'll be set up for time release, so that when I go to training, some stuff will pop up on the channel. Real minor, little quick things, just something to kind of keep the channel alive while I'm going to training. Anyway, guys, that's what I have for today. I hope everybody's doing well. We hope to see you later. And as always, model on.
I'm Dr. Lane Preston Reed, and welcome to The Whole Picture. In tonight's episode, we will be covering the 1946 Battle of the Dragons. This battle pitted the German military against the giant radioactive beasts created under Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin's Project Godkiller, or Godzilla as it was renamed in the West, marked a new chapter in modern warfare. In 1944, the German Military High Command staged a coup against the Nazi regime. With the Nazis gone, the German Conventional Armed Forces, the Wehrmacht, took over and immediately began working towards a ceasefire. The German military was able to complete an orderly retreat back into Germany, but in the east, the Russians wanted revenge. The Germans set up a defensive line across Poland over 100 miles deep, and the ceasefire on the Western Front had released 500,000 troops to bolster that line. Even the mighty Red Army could not breach these defenses, and as 1944 became 1945, and no progress was made, the morale of the Red Army waned. Stalin knew a Russian atomic bomb was still years away, so he looked for other ways to break the German line. This is where the work of an eccentric Romanian scientist named Dr. Mikhail Dragunov comes into play. The Dragon Doctor, as he was known, was unusual in that he was both a physicist and a biologist. His work used radiation to mutate reptilian life forms and was astonishingly successful. But there are those who feared what they saw as an unraveling of the natural order, ergo information was leaked, and the project was exposed. Here is how the story unfolded.
July 10th, 1946. The German High Command is informed of the existence of the Godkiller project. It is believed that these men were the first ones to refer to the giant beast as Godzilla. Their first decision on the matter is to confirm its existence and then, if it really does exist, determine its capabilities and location. The Luftwaffe assigns a pair of small tactical reconnaissance planes to fly a low-profile mission confirming the reports that the beast had been moved to a location near the demilitarized zone just outside of the city of Brest-Litovsk. The reconnaissance planes disguised their mission by flying a seemingly routine observation profile. It should not have attracted any special attention. Once over the target, the lead pilot started to make a transmission that was suddenly cut off. Only a shrill whine was heard over the radio as the transmitter melted. Neither aircraft was ever heard from nor seen again. Although the occasional loss of a single reconnaissance aircraft was not particularly suspicious, such a sudden loss of communications with two airplanes simultaneously, followed by the immediate disappearance of both aircraft, was very unusual. Another oddity, there was no Russian radio chatter about bringing down the two Luftwaffe aircraft. This normally would be an occasion for the Soviets to brag. The Luftwaffe High Command was now sufficiently suspicious that something quite bad was afoot. Another aircraft type was assigned to the next attempt at a reconnaissance mission: jets. 3 jets were sent in at the same time from different directions, and they returned with troubling images. The reports of Godzilla were not exaggerated. If anything, they had been somewhat conservative. While the German government held meetings with the Wehrmacht General Staff, scientists of all types were summoned to determine how to best deal with the new threat. Biologists, physicists, chemists, even zoologists were convened. They were dumbfounded. The Wehrmacht planned to take the initiative. The entire Western Wall had to be guarded from conventional attacks, so only an ad hoc reaction force could be put together for an initial strike. The first attempt would be a precision airstrike by Kriegsmarine Stuka dive bombers launched from the aircraft carrier Graf Zeppelin. Initially, they ran into some fighter opposition, but when they got closer, the Red Air Force broke off contact. The Germans were soon to learn why. When the Stukas got through to Godzilla's location, they immediately attacked. For the Stukas, it was a disaster. They made their attack and scored direct hits to no apparent avail other than to anger and enrage the giant beast. Within minutes, they had all been destroyed. Now the Germans knew why the Soviet fighters had flown away so soon. Godzilla is a reptile. Birds are natural predators to many reptiles, and Godzilla's natural reaction is to attack anything that flies. Any aircraft operating within 2 miles of Godzilla would risk being destroyed by its radioactive breath. But the attack wasn't entirely for naught. One Stuka crew managed to crash land and escape on foot. They would get a closer look at the Russian operation and would soon discover a key piece of information. Shortly after the air attack, a provisional panzer unit was cobbled together. They formed a line supported by artillery. If the high explosive aerial bombs could not stop the beast, then perhaps direct high-velocity cannon fire would be more effective. The panzer crews waited bravely and patiently, but before they could fire, they saw, much to their horror, that the beast was still being flanked by Russian tanks. The monster was not just aimlessly walking towards them, but was being escorted, possibly even guided. But the Russian tanks did not fire, and the Germans quickly noticed that they never got in front of the monster either. They only guarded its flanks and rear to prevent anyone from getting close in from behind. Once the monster reached 1,000 yards, the artillery began its barrage. If they could not stop the monster, perhaps they could discourage its Soviet escort. At 500 yards, the panzers opened direct fire. This got Godzilla's attention, which would prove to be a bad thing. Godzilla made quick work of the hastily prepared German defenses, its radiation breath superheating every tank that it saw, causing the Panzer's own ammunition to detonate. The Panzers did the only thing they could do. They beat a hasty retreat. But then something unexpected happened. An artillery round went a little bit long and hit next to a support vehicle. It looked like an ordinary supply truck. As soon as the truck was stopped, Godzilla stopped. The downed Stuka crew were hiding in the bushes near the damaged truck. As the Russians hurried to repair it, they noticed that it was not a supply truck, but a communications truck. It was packed full of receiving and transmitting equipment, and they noticed that it was directly behind Godzilla. The great creature's dorsal spine seemed to have been equipped with some sort of antennas. Was this how the Russians controlled the beast? They also noted that many of the Russians seemed to look sick. Some were even vomiting. Then they saw another truck pull up, a tanker. The monster seemed to slow and come to a stop, and when it did, the truck hooked up some sort of pipe and pumped in some sort of liquid into a hose near the monster's tail. After this servicing was completed and the communications truck was repaired, the Russians reawoke Godzilla and moved back into position to Godzilla's rear. The beast slowly began lumbering forward again. Once the Russians had cleared the area, the Stuka crew made their way to one of the knocked-out Panzers and searched until they found one with a working radio. They called their headquarters and reported what they saw. Now the German scientists had something concrete to work with. The German scientists suspected that this was Dr. Ivanovich Dragonov's work. His work was both known and shunned in the scientific community, and the sick Russian soldiers were likely due to radiation exposure. They quickly deduced that the monster was being controlled, and the communications truck was either broadcasting or repeating command signals. The group recommended that the communications truck should be made the primary target of the next attack, as, unlike the beast, it could not survive cannon fire. The ponderous pace of the creature and the frequent stops for servicing gave the Wehrmacht just a small amount of breathing room and enough time to determine a course of action. Several skirmishes were fought as the Germans learned that after each battle, the creature needed to rest and be tended to. The troops that were sent in to fight in these areas rarely got out alive. This was a sacrifice that had to be made. The Luftwaffe had somewhat better success with its new jets, as they were simply too fast for either the Russian fighters or Godzilla to intercept, if they didn't get too close. But their sporadic attacks were more a delaying tactic, as the monster was essentially unfazed by it. The Russian troops, however, were seeing their numbers decimated, but they pushed on. It was at this time that an enterprising young Luftwaffe general named Adolf Galland had an idea. Why not use a radar-directed missile to destroy the command truck? If done at night, the truck would be stationary, and its flat steel sides may provide enough of a radar return for the missile to lock onto it. Also, the radar would allow it to be fired from a safe standoff distance. High Command agreed to give it a try, and the jet was launched. The jet cruised high in the clear night sky, using distance, speed, and darkness as its protective shield. As they approached the target area, the backseat technician warmed up the radar and then he turned it on. And then something completely unexpected happened. Godzilla awoke, and to everyone's horror, all hell broke loose. Godzilla turned around and attacked everything in sight, Russian and German alike. In all of the mayhem, the Luftwaffe jet locked onto its target and fired. The missile missed its intended target, but it did not matter, as Godzilla's breath destroyed the command truck and the service truck. The beast ran amok for about an hour before it began to slow. By this time, both the Russians and Germans had pulled back out of harm's way. As the beast appeared to falter, the Panzers advanced to try their guns again. This time the shells appeared to be doing some damage. They fired volley after volley, and eventually Godzilla fell. But no one dared to venture too close. Early the next morning, an experienced infantry reconnaissance team was sent in to investigate. A dense fog had shrouded the battlefield, so no one could tell exactly what was happening. They made their way through the area without encountering any Russian forces. But just as they found the fallen beast, they were in for a new horror. They fled back to their own lines at a full run with no attempt to hide their movements. As they approached their own lines, they shouted, "Da ist nicht einer, das ist nicht einer." There is another one. There is another one. And this one was not so ominous. The new Godzilla was taller, longer, and more ferocious. It also was not being followed by any trucks or tanks. It was moving on its own with a serious purpose. As the new Godzilla arrived on scene, it looked at the seemingly dead Godzilla and roared in fury. Then, something completely unexpected happened. It took up what could only be called a vigil. It stayed with the other beast and wrapped its tail around it. Some witnesses claimed that there was a light, possibly an energy transfer between the two. Suddenly, it began to make its way northwest. Then, the first Godzilla slowly woke and arose. It was simply following the new Godzilla, which, of the two, seemed to be the alpha. There were now two monsters to deal with, but the second one seemed weak and often stopped to rest. Each time it did, the alpha would take up a defensive posture. The German panzers, with hard-earned wisdom, decided to keep a discreet distance and just observed. A captured Russian map showed the entire Soviet push had been designed to plow a path through to Peenemünde, where the German rocket research was done. Stalin had always considered these weapons not only a threat, but a symbol of German might. It was obvious by now that this is where the two monsters were going, but the captured map served as confirmation. Despite this, the German command was leery about committing too many resources to the area. These giant monsters may be just some sort of glorified diversions for a larger attack elsewhere. The absence of any controlling equipment led the Germans to believe that somehow this new Godzilla was following some sort of pre-programmed mission. Perhaps it was just a new and improved version of the original. Although they had their reservations, the Wehrmacht High Command decided to make Peenemünde the main battlefield for two reasons. First, they had little option. The Godzillas were on their way there, and the Wehrmacht was unable to stop them with what they had on hand. Secondly, they had a monster of their own to unleash. Despite its limited mobility, it could get to Peenemünde in time. At the request of the German scientists, some of them had been brought to Peenemünde to get a closer look at the beasts. The zoologist, Dr. Emanuel von Zorg, made a hypothesis. The Beta Godzilla was shorter in most dimensions, in height, length, and even in the length of its snout. It had narrower shoulders but wider hips and a bulged belly. Reptiles in general are not fraternal animals, and they do not normally defend one another. It seemed to follow that the Alpha, who had a protective nature towards the first Godzilla, was trying to do more than just defend its own kind. The Alpha, he theorized, was a male, and the Beta was a female. Probably its mate, and, given its girth, she was likely pregnant. The scientists had another reason for wanting to witness the Battle of Peenemünde, as they also very rapidly developed a new weapon against Godzilla. The scientists had built a cadmium cannon shell that could neutralize the radioactive isotope that gave Godzilla its immortality. But there was a major problem. Cadmium was still a hard-to-acquire isotope in wartime Germany, and there was only enough for one shell. After all, when they started working on the project, there was only one monster. Also, this shell had to be delivered precisely and at close range. The task was given to a particularly good panzer crew. The German army even reenacted the famous assignment for recruiting in a propaganda film. According to German panzer ace Werner von Schlag, this is how he remembers them being assigned the mission.
Gentlemen, wir gehen morgen früh zurück, das Biest zu bekämpfen. Hast du Angst? Du solltest es sein. Aber keine Sorge. Wir haben eine neue Taktik und eine neue Waffe. Ich kann nicht mehr ins Detail gehen als das für jetzt, aber ihre Notwendigkeit, sich auf den Kampf vorzubereiten. Keine Abweichungen. Wir werden alle brauchen, dass sie auch Feldwebel einschließt. Entschuldigen Sie die Herren, ich habe viel mit Ihrem Kapitän zu besprechen. Sie erhalten spezielle Schalen und Unterricht es auf Ihrer Verwendung später heute Abend. Jetzt müssen Sie nur wissen, dass Ihre Bestellungen exakt befolgt werden müssen. Die Amerikaner haben eine Theorie und unsere Physiker vereinbaren damit. Die Verwendung von Cadmium sollte diesen Godzilla schwächen und machen ihn oder ihr anfällig für unsere Kanonen. Der Schuss muss in den Mund oder eine offene Wunde. Es muss entweder seinen Blutkreislauf oder Lungen geben. Vorausgesetzt, er hat Lungen. Viel Glück und Gott gute Jagd.
The new Godzilla was simply too powerful for artillery and tanks to even slow it down, so a path was cleared to Peenemünde, where bait was laid for a trap. While they were making preparations for the battle at Peenemünde, the Germans overheard almost continuous Russian chatter referring to something called the First One. A message that kept getting repeated was, "Ervi is Nika Special." The First One has escaped. No one knew what it meant, but given that the Russians began pulling tanks and artillery from the DMZ to address this issue, it could not be good. Just as predicted, the Godzillas arrived at Peenemünde and easily breached the walls. The Alpha Godzilla immediately attacked the V5 rocket on the pad. It was quickly destroyed, and the rest of the complex looked soon to follow. Of course, this rocket was simply bait, and the trap was now sprung. The Alpha Godzilla was hit, and hit hard, by a direct shot from heavy naval guns. But from where? Although Peenemünde was by the sea, there were no ships anywhere to be seen. Then, the Germans' own monster made its presence known. From the nearby trees came the Germans' ultimate propaganda weapon, the P-1000 land cruiser, known simply as the Ratte, or the Rat. With 14-inch naval guns, this man-made monstrosity came forward to do battle, monster on monster. But as the land cruiser reloaded, Godzilla fired back with his atomic breath. However, this time it was to no apparent avail. The outer armor of this machine was coated with a heat-resistant ceramic and heat-treated steel that was 2 feet thick in front. Massive beast against massive beast. A biological monstrosity against a mechanical monstrosity. And as they dueled, both grew weaker. But the Beta Godzilla, still weakened from the previous attack, simply looked on. The plan was simple. The land cruiser's giant guns would open a large wound in the Alpha, large enough for the cadmium shell to enter through. Then, the hand-picked crew of a sniper tank would put the cadmium shell through the open wound. They would have to be on high ground where they could get a shot off in any direction, and until it was time to fire, they simply waited under camouflage. When the land cruiser moved forward, the Alpha Godzilla would block his approach towards the Beta. But when the land cruiser moved back, the Alpha Godzilla did not advance. There was one more thing the observers noticed. The Alpha seemed to be losing interest in destroying the complex. Back and forth, to and fro, fire, counter-fire. The land cruiser and the Alpha battled for over an hour, neither one getting an advantage, but the engines of the land cruiser were overheating. It was not made for such maneuvering. The radiation levels were rising and the armor was beginning to weaken. Then it happened. During an attack by the Alpha, a fire broke out and spread quickly inside the land cruiser. The crew was forced to abandon it, and with a sustained burst from Godzilla's radiation breath, the land cruiser finally exploded. All this time, the sniper tank was looking for a clear shot, when all of a sudden they were blindsided. From the cleared path the Germans had left for the Alpha came a new threat, a horrid-looking beast of smaller size but much worse power. The original creature, the first one. The first anyone knew of its arrival was an attack the Alpha from behind with a withering blast of radioactive breath. It looked like Dr. Von Zorg's theory was right. The Alpha was a male and the other female, but now there was a new player on the board. And this original creature, this first one, this prototype monstrosity, was challenging the Alpha for the female. The sniper tank wisely decided to sit still and wait things out and see how this battle evolved. Now that the monsters were preoccupied with each other, Dr. Von Zorg wanted a closer look at the beasts. He believed it was worth the risk to take a small liaison plane in for a closer look. He found Luftwaffe Major Bruno Stockel, a World War I veteran who was considered to be the craziest pilot in the Luftwaffe, and convinced him to fly him in for a closer look. After all, whatever happened, this was history. This new player on the board was called the First One because it was the first of Dr. Draganovich's creations to survive, and despite being smaller than the others, it was twice as dangerous. Its blood was essential to the success of the God Killer project, so it was kept alive, but it was uncontrollable. No amount of conditioning or remote mind control worked on the beast, so it was constantly sedated. But over time, its hyperreactive metabolism built up resistance to the sedatives. Only the calming effect brought by the introduction of the female allowed the doctor to keep it under control. But when the Alpha and the female were finally removed from the laboratory compound to enter operational service, the first one became increasingly agitated. The staff tried to terminate it, but it broke free and destroyed the entire complex in its escape. The first one had no trouble in tracking the scent of the other two and left a path of destruction in its wake across Mother Russia. Now it was here, in Peenemünde, out of control, and driven by a billion-year-old radioactively charged mating drive. Dr. von Zorg radios his suspicions to the field commanders. With only one cadmium shell, they could either kill the female and have the two irate and nearly indestructible monsters loose across Germany, or they could let them fight it and hopefully one would kill the other. Whichever one prevailed could then be killed with the cadmium shot, leaving only the far more docile female to deal with. Since she awoke from her last attack, she had received none of the mysterious fluid the Dragon Doctor had treated her with, and seemed to be losing much of her hyper-aggressive tendencies. She seemed weak and possibly vulnerable to conventional weapons. The order was sent down. Let the Alpha and the original fight it out, then use the cadmium shot on the survivor. The Germans did not have to wait long. The original immediately attacked the Alpha. The two animals fought very differently, the Alpha preferring to use its tail and teeth, the original preferring to claw and bite. But then it was learned that the original was also able to expel radiation from its tail as well. The original focused on trying to expel radiation in the Alpha's mouth and throat. The Alpha was trying to break the original's neck. Finally it happened, after nearly an hour of fighting. With their radioactive cores beginning to overheat, perhaps even melt down, it happened. The original was able to force a fatal radiation emission from its tail through the Alpha's throat and into its heart. It was the final fatal blow. As the Alpha made its death fall, the original focused on the female and did what can only be described as a mating ritual before her. It was not well received. He was clearly not her chosen champion. The seemingly distraught, she simply turned her back on him and headed for the sea. The original roared in what seemed to be the cry of a spurned lover, and that was just the chance the sniper tank needed. The gunner took his shot. He made it count. The cadmium attacked the original on a cellular level. Its radioactive dampening power spread throughout the original, causing massive cellular destruction. The mighty creature, unable to heal itself, began to succumb to its many wounds. Slowly its life ebbed away. The creature fell, and its end was nigh. The panzers slowly moved in. One Tiger tank pulled in close to put a cannon shot right through its head to be sure it was dead. The female, without reaction, made a slow walk towards the nearby sea. With her still being potentially quite dangerous and only a few panzers left, it was decided that continuing the battle was a fool's errand. Panzers slowly retreated and made a path for her. If she took it, she could go. If not, the battle would resume. Dr. von Zorg was sure she was dying, and further bloodshed would be in vain. She headed toward the ocean and was allowed to leave unmolested. The Battle of the Dragons was now over. As the creatures lay prostrate across the battlefield, finally unable to heal, they began to bleed. But the blood was highly radioactive and triggered the Geiger counters that had been installed in each panzer. As a result, the Germans immediately withdrew. This area would be contaminated for at least the next century. There was a final closing chapter to this story. The Luftwaffe committed its entire jet bomber force to a mission to destroy what remained of Dr. Draganovich's research facility. This turned out to be unnecessary, as the original had pretty much done that. What was not known until some time later was that the Dragon Doctor had been heist upon his own petard, for he was one of the first people killed when the original Godzilla escaped. There was a lesson in this for all of humanity. All science requires sacrifice, and every action, no matter how benign or how complex, will have some sort of unforeseen consequence.